Partnership Foundation, joining us to speak about their Life Promotion Toolkit. The group aims to reimagine the future of life promotion. Together they will share their accomplishments, challenges, and what can be done to support the work. I'd like to welcome to the group Connor Lafortune, Marcel Morrisseau, and Gabrielle Jubinville. And I was lucky enough to get to see them last night at the Beringia Center. So we're very lucky to have them coming here from Ontario, Manitoba. Nice. La Rivière de la Française? Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Tante everyone. DC Garson, Marshall, Egwa Kapiana Set Migazo. Tante Ucha Nina, Manitoba, Egwa Musagagi and Cree Nation. So hello everyone, my name is Marshall Jack Morrisseau. I'm from Manitoba and I come from a few different reserves, Opaswek Cree Nation, Musagagi and Cree Nation, which are both located in the northern part of Manitoba. But I grew up in Brandon, Manitoba, which is a small, pretty transient city that has a university where I attend, and where I live with my family, my wife and our puppy. So, yeah, I'm just gonna do a little introduction, and then how it's gonna roll out is that we're gonna, after my opening, we're gonna kind of briefly go over the creation of the toolkit, its purpose, how to use it, all that jazz. And then we're going to do a little bit of we're going to share our gifts, as we say, because we all each have sacred gifts that are meant to be shared with others. So we're going to talk a little bit about our stories and a little bit about ourselves. So I'll probably save more of my personal story for that time. But yeah, other than that, as part of an opening, we like to give some form of gratitude or some sort of acknowledgement. And my way of doing that is I'm a storyteller, and I'm going to tell a story to you folks, a creation story. Creation stories are a big aspect of one of our sections in the toolkit, spirituality, which we'll touch on later. But creation stories basically are, historical stories that have been passed down from generation to generation that inform us of our history, of our ways of being and knowing, and inform us of how we came to be. And they vary from group to group. As Cree, Inuak, Swampy Cree, we have a lot of creation stories about Oshkiniijig. Okay. I'll get real into it. When I get nervous, I turn into a bit of a trickster, so. Okay. So, this creation story is about Oshkiniijig, and we know Oshkiniijig, he has different names depending on who you ask where I'm from. He's kind of associated with Bigfoot and Sasquatch, right? And one thing I do know about around the world with indigenous people is that we have a lot of stories about these figures, these almost like deities. For Christian people, they had Jesus Christ. For Crees, we had Oshkiniijig. And Oshkiniijig was one of the first peoples, the first beings that was given the ability to talk and to communicate, and was sort of like one of the first peoples. So when he was placed into the physical world, there was the spirits already, there was the land, and there was the animals that all kind of had their own organizations, their structures, their ways of being. And at first, Oshkiniijig was very egotistical, I would say. He sort of was a trickster in a way that he would just kind of disrupt how things were. He'd go around teasing people. If an indigenous person's teasing you, it means they like you. So, don't. It's a good sign. But they say that's where we kind of, learned how to tease and that sort of thing. But anyways, he was more, in the beginning, he was more rude and more, like I said, there's no other way to put it, he was a dick. And he went around, he went around and there was, animals, they had their, families or whatever, and he would just kind of poke his head into things and just kind of like, just bother people, annoy them. And he became known for that. And he sort of began to sort of disrupt the cycle, because everyone was starting to take on these qualities of like, I would say, selfishness and no accountability and that sort of thing. Those are the things that he kind of was projecting at the time. So one day, Oshkiniijig, he's going for a walk, right? And he wants to go walk on the beach. But there's a storm coming in. And the animals are looking at Oshkiniijig. He's walking up to the beach. They're like, Oshkiniijig, there's a storm coming. You shouldn't be on that beach right now. Oshkiniijig is like, oh, whatever, I can do what I want. And he walked, and the animals, they all fled, right? They went to seek shelter, and Oshkiniijig just didn't care. He's seen the storm coming in. He heard the thunderbirds. The thunderbirds were giving him warning too. They were just like, Oshkiniijig, it's about the storm, lightning's coming in. It's not safe. And he says, whatever, I can do what I want. And so that's what he did. He went for a walk, and the storm came in. And then what had happened was that lightning struck the cliff where he was walking, and a bunch of rocks came tumbling down the cliff. It was like a little landslide, and this big boulder came rolling down, and it crushed him right down the middle. All you could see was his hands and his arms like this, and he started freaking out. He started crying out for help, and he was like, "Danse, pisson, thunderbirds, hello, help me!" And the thunderbirds are looking down at him. They're like, "We're not going to help you. You're a dick. You didn't listen to us. We told you you're going to get hurt." And he kept crying and whining, and then they started to feel bad for him. So Thunderbird came down, and they're like, all right, we're going to help you out of there. And so that boulder was right smack down, right on top of him. So what the Thunderbird had to do was send down a lightning bolt. And so it flew up high, and it went all the way up there, and then crack, and then tsh, and that thunderbolt split the rock right down the middle of him. And that's how we got our ass crack. The kids love that one. But yes, that's one of the creation stories my elders tell me. And I was just as surprised as you were. I was like, what? But no, the way it goes is that we are created in Oshkiniijig's image. And these are one of the lessons that Oshkiniijig had to go through and learn how to, listen to the spirits and the animals and to conduct himself in a more respectful manner. He did remain, the way he was, as a trickster at heart. So he still kind of was bothering and teasing people and that sort of thing. But, he became more grounded and became, more of a teacher and more wiser, as they say. And, that's one of the stories that, I like to share during conferences like this, because we know that the topic and subjects that we are engaging in are very, very hard. I have no doubt that we all here have lived experiences with mental health and the issues surrounding it. So I'd like to share that story just to kind of, not only lighten up the mood, but just to kind of just share a little bit about my history and how I sort of conduct myself. So I'm going to Okay, well, I'll just talk about the team real quick that created the toolkit. So initially when Thunderbird came forward with this project, they actually had 16 youth identified across Canada. Unfortunately, this was before COVID, and when COVID happened, everything got put on hold for almost a year, and a lot of those youth just kind of moved on to other projects. But the youth that did stay on, there was 5, and there was 3 of us that were asked to lead the project, myself, Gabrielle, and Will, who was supposed to be here but unfortunately couldn't make it. And we each were given basically a large sum of money, and we basically said, okay, we want you to create a toolkit for Indigenous communities, but we want it to be Indigenous youth-led. And that's all they told us. And we were like, wow. How are we going to do this? But what we ended up doing is we ended up meeting virtually over the course of 6 months. And I think the most important thing that we did during that time was build a relationship with each other. And I can really sincerely say that I love every one of these members. They all have a very special place in my heart. Their impact, their stories, the space they held during these meetings, because it got very tough at times. Life had happened. Life promotion is it's an inherently hard thing to discuss and to work with. So they're very caring in that way, and I have a great appreciation for them. And just a little more background. The project was initially supposed to be delivered in person. Well, it was supposed to be developed in person, but like I said, it happened virtually over Zoom. And we were supposed to present it and launch the toolkit at the World Suicide Prevention Conference in Winnipeg, and that got delayed as well. So what ended up happening is we took that time to really, again, build that relationship with each other and get on and get moving, with the work. And we had a knowledge keeper, elder, Dr. Ed Connors, who really is just a life promotion champion. And him and John Rice are developers of a Feather Carriers program that actually our team is now taking part in. And Ed was just such an important part of this project because, like I said, he's a champion in life promotion. He was actually one of the first to kind of coin the term, and he's been a big part of our journey. Did you want to?
Sure. I'll just let you pass. All right, so you've heard a little bit about us and our team. Now we'd like to present a little bit more about the toolkit. Like Marshall had said, it was really an open concept. It was just like create something, make it work. And so a lot of our first meetings were really just like everybody looking around and just being like, what are we doing? And what is a toolkit? Is it something physical? Is it like a box of tools that people can use? How are we doing this, and what are we doing it with? And so when we started creating, we really didn't start with what we would put into it. We started talking about what we needed to have be explicitly clear when we started having it into a physical thing. So one of the things we determined was creating brave and safe spaces. So in many spaces, especially youth spaces, we talk about safe spaces and that being so integral to people's learning, to physical safety, to emotional safety. But we often don't talk about that courage that also needs to be built before we have those safe spaces. So we not only want people to be safe, we want them to feel empowered and brave in those spaces as well, to share, to listen, to learn. And so that's one of the key features right at the beginning. We talk about creating those brave and safe spaces, especially for those who just don't know where to go about creating those. Then we also talk about the importance of having gentle teachers. And so teachers can come in many shapes and forms. It could be in form of knowledge holders or elders or colleagues or brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles, but there are different ways that we can have teachers. And we wanted to make it so integral to have gentle teachers, because when we're we're youth looking to seek some knowledge from those that are maybe older than us, or have just like there's a little bit of that barrier, you know, especially if it's someone who you see as having a higher stature, like a grandparent, things like that. You know, you feel a little intimidated, and so you have to humble yourself to enter that space, and you have to be gentle and kind when you're asking. And we just also ask that be reciprocal, and so to have those folks be gentle as well. So to teach gently and to receive that information gently as well. Now, if you'll look at the toolkit, maybe you noticed it a little bit at the beginning. We had said the word Suicide Prevention Conference. However, that is the only mention of suicide in this toolkit, because it is a strength-based approach to health and healing for our Indigenous youth. We also had long conversations about providing a trigger warning, because we did want to provide youth the space to understand that there might be some heavy things that they uncover from themselves when they're reading the toolkit. There's nothing that is explicitly damaging in the toolkit, but it might promote a lot of unsettling feelings. Maybe it brings up a lot of history. Maybe in learning the things through the activities, you'll find some things out and it'll be hard. And so we wanted to provide something that eases our youth into learning. But speaking personally, I hate the word trigger. It's been overused, and it's also used as a way to create a barrier. When I hear the word trigger or I see trigger warning, I put a blockade around myself and I take a step back and I say that I'm going to be hurt, and therefore I'm not going to participate actively. And so we wanted to avoid that conversation and people feel comfortable approaching this and not feel like I'm ready to be hurt when I enter here. And so we called it a before you begin. It's a soft introduction to the toolkit. It's a strength-based way to introduce ourselves inside of this realm that might be a little hard to hear. And when we do things like this, there's a few times where we change the way that we use language throughout the toolkit, and it's really just taking those Indigenous lenses and taking concepts that we use in the Western world, but just shaping it in a different way, softening the edges a little bit, and making it more language that is accessible to our youth, that is not further damaging them as well. Now, what is life promotion? I feel like this is the crowd that I do not need to explain what life promotion is. We're pretty familiar with the concept, mental health and all of those wonderful things. Life promotion is not this new term like we were talking about. Although the term has been maybe coined in the last few years, the concept is very foundational. It's very much so anchored in a lot of our customary ways of being, in our knowledge, in our cultures. It's really about that balance and that hope, and when we sought out to make this toolkit, we talked about what is the opposite of depression, what is the opposite of those mental health struggles, and we really focused on connection. And so the toolkit is divided in 4 sections: connection to self, spirit, land, and community. And even further, when we were creating the activities, it was really hard to decipher which activity went in which category, because if you're doing a land-based activity but you're also working on self, then how do you kind of fit that in? So even though you might be looking at an activity that had to be categorized under those 4, you can really adapt it to whatever you need to work on that connection. It's really about creating those connections and then maintaining them. And so not just going like, oh, I have a connection to land, check, and now I'm done. You know, I can move on to the next, but really an active way of participating in your health and healing. We answer questions on hope, meaning, belonging, and purpose. So a lot of our youth are asking, where am I from? Who am I? Where can I go from here? And so these activities and things that we talk about in the toolkit are really to achieve the answers, or maybe to help them find the way to get them in the end. And we talk about it's really about connection and balance, and about implementing things along the way. When we think of suicide prevention, it's often like it states, a preventative measure. But often for a lot of people seeing that, especially Indigenous youth, we see that as, oh, that is my only outcome. If everyone's telling me that all Indigenous youth need suicide prevention, then that means that all Indigenous youth are suicidal. All Indigenous youth have the outcome of committing suicide, of doing all of these things. And so it becomes something that it's our only choice. It's our fate. It's what we have been written as the only thing we can do. And so when we shift things as life promotion, so having the beautiful umbrella, and then having suicide prevention being a branch of that, or a way of addressing life promotion, but not being the entire discussion. And so if we focus on that suicide, we focus on that death-based learning, then all that Indigenous youth are seeing is that they are dying and that there's no other choice. But if we focus on life instead, then we are bringing bringing that back into community. And it's not only something that we implement when it's necessary or when you're struggling, it's something that you do every single day. All of us do life promotion, I would say, pretty much all the time, and it's things that you can do at every stage of your life, and it's different things because it's about the intention that you put into it. I forget what the other slide is. Oh, that's just our little statement, but I very briefly went over it, but you can feel free to look at it. We will be talking about where you can get the toolkits afterwards as well. But I hope you enjoy. We're going to go a little look over the different sections that we've created, and then we'll share a little bit about ourselves.
Tanse Nitisnigasin, Niwa Utinisko, Egwa Gabrielle Jubinville. Hi, my name is Forwinds Woman, Niwa Utinisko, and my name is also Gabrielle Jubinville. And I'll be taking you over connection to land. As we know, land is very important to Indigenous folks. It's how we connect, and with life promotion, we're always trying to find ways to connect better to ourselves, and especially land. So basically the breakdown of each section is similar to perspectives of the youth working group. Here we have rural and also urban perspectives of living, and yeah, I can go next slide. Then we have reflection, our reflections as a group, and also community reflection questions. These can be done by yourself or with others, small groups, community, it doesn't really matter. And then we have activities in each section. So this activity is medicine, movement is medicine. And then we also have links of who to follow, where you can go, what you can do. Each activity in this toolkit is very accessible and inclusive to, sometimes maybe you're only going to use this toolkit for one section, or just, it's really adaptable, and we really wanted to create it in a way where everyone can use it, or just like maybe you're needing ideas or you need to be more creative or whatever it is, and connecting. So this is exploring community capacity for land-based activities. Then we have food sovereignty, gardening, food programs. Living off the land, building your own fire. And then we have connection to self. You can go next. So basically it's the same layout, our perspectives, what connection to self means, the mind and the body. Keep going. And then we get right into activities again. So this is creating a self-care kit. When we created this, usually where I'm from, we call them bundles. It could be sacred items, but also at the same time, when we're creating a self-care kit, we want to put things into it. I'm kind of taking you through this activity a little bit. But you can really put anything in that self-care kit. So it can be like bath products, snacks, lists. I know for myself, I watch way too much Netflix, and I can eat everything when I'm not supposed to. And sometimes when I'm relaxing, when we talk about rest or reflecting, usually that's what I do, and I probably shouldn't. Always laying down and eating and watching Netflix. Maybe I should, I do actually have my own bundle, but to look at it and, reflect on it and just to help me in my own way. Then we have introducing yourself in your own language. You find it really important to, language is very important, especially since not a lot of us speak it anymore. But this is like definitely a start. So we have Cree, there's 6 to 7 dialects. Me and Marshall are both Cree, but I'm Plains Cree. I speak a different dialect than him. And then we have Moose Cree, Anishinaabe, Makwa, Michif, Blackfoot, Sioux. There's actually so many languages, which is super cool because we were nations before pre-colonial contact. Then we have exploring your identities, who I am, where do I come from. Then we also have resources at the end. just to kind of go further and dig deeper, or maybe they're needing something else. And then we have connection to community, and I'll pass it over to Marshall.
Yeah, so connection to community was very important to have because we acknowledge that there are a lot of folks that may be disconnected or are in the process of reconnecting to their community, or we have folks that are just not exactly in their home territories, like myself. I grew up in Brandon, and I consider Brandon my community. So we have activities in community that kind of help foster that connection, because that's really the basis of like our sovereignty is community, and having those connections and building and maintaining those relationships is very important and vital to our nationhood. So a lot of the activities that were put into this section were done with that intention, and we also would just want to acknowledge that it's a very it can be a very daunting task for a lot of Indigenous youth to kind of foster that connection, but we also want them to recognize how important it is to be connected to a community, and the support and the networks that come with that, and how that it's not in our customs we were a community that they were all working towards the same purpose, and we all had an integral part in achieving that purpose. So this was a very important part of our toolkit. Yeah, and so like every section starts off with perspectives, and we also offer up a reflection that we encourage folks to do when they're engaging in these sections. Yeah, and so just a few activities here, and each activity is sort of not only is it explained and it's presented in an accessible way, as in we have lessons learned, we have additional resources that might help you along in the activity. Craft nights. You just go to the next one. Tea talks for intergenerational healing. This was actually a really cool activity that was brought up by one of our youth, Megan, who's done a lot of actual community work in the Haisla Nation. They had a lot of really cool ideas, and this is one that was brought forward. Having elders be brought in and youth, and having them just sit down and have tea. It's just that simple. A lot of the activities are made with that intention that you can really do it, and it doesn't you don't have to write a grant or nothing like that. Yeah, and a share and circle activity. We actually do this activity lots because, again, it's very accessible. Like, we could have a share and circle in here, just move the tables and sit in circle, and using a ceremonial object. And it doesn't have to be a feather; it can be just like a rock or a stick, and that really grounds folks in the circle to be respectful and pay attention and that sort of thing. Connection to spirituality. So this was our approach with this section was we wanted to be as open and mindful about spirituality, because a lot of nations, communities, because of Indian Act policies and that sort of thing, became very exclusive and almost closed off from sharing spirituality or even talking about spirituality. It became almost like something like I don't want to say taboo, but like it became something that you shouldn't openly talk about, and that's that can be a protocol of many communities. But what we wanted to do is acknowledge that we come from very different backgrounds. We come from the West Coast, the prairie regions, Ontario and that sort of thing, and further out east. So we wanted to be very respectful, and also acknowledge that this is just our group and our perspectives, and we made sure to include that in the opening of this section, so we included our perspectives from each of the members. And the reason why we did that is because we wanted to like just let folks know that, you know, these are different beliefs and understandings and ways of being that we're all kind of brought together, and it's not representative of all nations, right? And yeah, I just think that my own understanding of spirituality is that I truly believe that there is no medium for which we speak about spirituality, or nor there is no like wrong way to do it. This is just my opinion. You know, I think that, you know, online media, social media has a very important part in how we reclaim and how we talk about things like spirituality and life promotion, because it's a part of our lives and it's a part of our ways of being. And you know, we're not static, we're fluid, right? We adapt, and I really believe that social media does play a big role in how we have these conversations. So yeah, so I told you a creation story, but we also have a list of other resources to other creation stories. And if you actually look in the toolkit, there'll be like a QR code on some of the pages that will take you directly to the links and the resources that are in the toolkit, so it's more accessible that way. Creating spiritual items, making a traditional dwelling, yeah. And yeah, like everything was done with the intention of being inclusive, open-minded, and just, you know, keeping in mind that yes, there are some strict protocols. Like where I'm from, there are some communities that will not take pictures of certain things, won't post it online, that sort of thing. And yeah, those are very important protocols. However, you know, we have to also acknowledge that, you know, we have youth that are displaced. We have youth in areas that don't necessarily have access to things like this, and they just can't be cut out or left out because of their, you know, their situation and things that are out of their control. So we kept that in mind when we created the activities in this section. And yeah, we're gonna show a video. Okay. And also, we did a few videos about spirituality that are in the toolkit that you can access through QR codes, or they're online on the webpage that will show you how to access. But yeah, that's basically our presentation. We wanted to leave enough time for questions and all that sort of thing, but I will just say that I'm very grateful for all you, and you know, for being here and just being a part of this summit. And I just think that it's a very important dialogue that we're having here today. So I really encourage you folks to ask us any questions that you may have, and we'll take some good time to answer them.
I also realized that this is the old slideshow. In the new slideshow, I had shown like how to access the toolkit online, how to do all of those things. So if you also would like that, I can try to do it from memory. But if you're trying to access the toolkit online, it's just wisepractices.ca. And then there's going to be a pop-up that says for youth and for community. You'll just click on for youth. My face will pop up. And just below it, it'll say Life Promotion Toolkit. And if you click on that, there's going to be a big download button. So it's very easy to do that. And there are also ways to access the toolkit, like to get printed copies. And that's more of a SurveyMonkey, so I'm not going to list off the letters for that address because I do not know it by heart. But there are ways to also get those toolkits physically in your community. Maybe we can pause here for some questions. We do have a little bit of our stories that we did want to share to give you a little bit more context on who we are as people, and maybe different avenues for engaging youth and things like that. But we can pause for questions now if there are some pressing questions that would like to be answered. And you could address it to one of us specifically or all of us as a group. it's really up to all of you.
How did you come together as a group? I know you talked a little bit about how there was 60 of you and then it got down to a small group, but how did you, who brought you together?
Yeah, so Thunderbird Partnership Foundation basically sent a call out to organizations across Canada to have them put forward youth who were already involved in life promotion work. So yeah, 16 youth came forward for that call out, and yeah. Oh, and then it was a nomination for other youth.
So essentially, for those of us who were applying as youth, because they were our youth leaders, and I was one of the youth that participated. Although we all participated as far as the toolkit, they had just had background work that was a lot just more. But as far as for the youth applying, there was a nomination period where folks would nominate a number of youth, and there were things like, why are you nominating these youth? What have they done in the community? What can they bring to the table? Those kind of questions. And then from there, Thunderbird decided who was getting it, and then sent us an email and was like, there's a meeting tonight. And I was like, okay. And that's basically how I received the information. But it was really just a call out for Indigenous youth across Turtle Island to participate in this initiative. And from there, we had our first meeting, and that's where we went. And it was really up to our group to decide where we were going from there. So is very much so. You can see the beautiful work that you can have created by Indigenous youth if you just kind of give them a blank slate. Because this amazing document that's 100 some pages, I believe, or close to, was created over a period of less than 6 months, and we really only met once a week virtually to actually talk about it. And most of those sessions were about community building and actually going through some of the activities. One of the icebreakers that we constantly do, we always do an opening and a closing, and one of those revolved around describing how we were feeling using only the 4 elements and things like that. And so I would say that most of our meetings were not as much working meetings in the sense of creating. It was really about community building, and then the work for the actual toolkit was more so done on our own, but in very little time with very few people. And we are all, if we're not both students and working, we're all working. And so it's quite impressive to see the work that was created in such a short amount of time. I think you might have to wait for the mic.
So now that you guys' toolkit is done, what's the next steps? What are you planning on doing from here on out? Is your project over? You guys done? Or is there something you're going to move forward with and carry to your communities?
You really sound like our elder, because the meeting we had to be like, hey guys, it's official, it's launched, and he goes, cool. Now what? And we're like, can we not have a minute to be like, this is cool? He really just looked at us and that's nice, but also, where's this going? How are we getting it out? All of those things. And so from just the release, we have worked in different ways to actually get the toolkit out there, because we can have created it, but if it stays online, then nobody sees it. So I think each of us showed it on our social media, in our platforms, and all of those things, but also there were campaigns around it through Thunderbird, through different media, forms of media. A lot of our networking happens at conferences such as this. We met Jen at the last conference that we did, and that's why we're here. And so it kind of, everything snowballs in that way. But there are talks, I don't think we mentioned it for this presentation, but there is the intention to keep this document living. And so to keep updating it with new information, we hope that the more youth that use it, the more feedback we could have. And so we can update some things. Oh, we didn't like this choice of language, maybe we can review it. Perfect. perfect, let's do that. It is also available in the French language, and I am a francophone person, and so I work directly in translating to ensure that there was that cultural lens, because often when we translate documents that have a historic and cultural background, everything just gets translated word for word, and there's those barriers that are created. And specifically for this toolkit, we wanted it to be accessible for youth, so we had a lot of conversations around the language that we were using, the way we were shaping things, and so we're not writing academic texts here. We want youth to actually feel good about using these things, and when that comes to using it in French, there's a lot of barriers that comes to how to translate things properly, quote unquote. And so we work directly with many of the outside teams to make sure that our youth can actually use this and want to use this. But there are different ways that we are branching off. I'm specifically working with School Untitled Ontario to implement it as a teaching document that teachers can use in Northern and Northwestern Ontario in schools directly, both in French and in English. And so there are different ways that we are sharing it within our circles and also adapting it to new environments. Would you like to hear more about our personal stories now? Awesome. We will leave more room for questions because we also wanted it to be a very interactive conversation. We will be playing a video. I don't know if you've noticed on the format we are missing a member, and so we wanted to have his voice still at the table. So Marshall suggested that we play the video that he created as part of this work. And I just realized that it will not be up on this. Oh, it will? Okay, perfect. I just meant it was my old PowerPoint. So perfect. So we welcome you to listen to Will Landon.
I'll just say a few words. Will. Sorry. And I just want to introduce Will a little bit. Will Landon is Anishinaabe from Ontario. He was one of the youth leads on this project, and I just really have to acknowledge Will. He's a very very grounded individual in his culture, in his worldviews, and in his customs. He's a champion on mental health, life promotion, and leadership. And he really did set the bar for myself and Gabrielle as far as, leadership, organization, and that sort of thing. And, he was a very, very important part of the creation of this toolkit. So I really wish he could have been here today. And, he's going through a hard time. So I asked that you maybe just keep him in your thoughts. And yeah, so this is a video. I said that we did some videos about spirituality, and this was one of his videos that I just love listening to. So.
Peace is always something I've searched for. I'm a person who has multiple diagnoses of post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, and social anxiety. And I've always searched for this sense of peace. And spirituality is that peace. That's what we look for. Sometimes it's not the easiest thing to interpret. It takes a lot of effort. But this is where I found peace. No matter what's going on in my life, no matter what I do, this lake is where I find peace. There are 3 spirits that my parents have told me that live here. And each of them love us as people. I think spirituality is not something that's easily defined. And it's not something that we easily understand, because we're only human beings after all. We can't comprehend that there are things beyond our physical world. And sometimes there are things like the spirits that live among us. And I think that's the only reason why I'm alive today. No matter what I've done to myself, I've always survived because of the spirit guides that I have. That's what spirituality is to me. And I think it's for everybody. Whether you believe in Jesus Christ, Allah, any of them, or the spirits among us, Creator. They all believe in one thing, I think. And it's that they love us. So no matter what it is you believe in, no matter what gets you through the day, know that something loves you and they want you to live. To me, at least, that's what spirituality is. Miigwech.
Is it on? Yeah, it's on now. Yeah. Hi, Will. Thank you. Okay. I guess I introduce myself because I'll just do it again. So when I said Natisni Gasa, it means my name is, but Natisni, the root word of that word, also means that I'm introducing the generations that came before me. Because if you're ever around Indigenous kin, they'll always be like, "Who's your mom? Who's your dad? Who's your aunties and uncles?" So I definitely love to recognize that. My cookum, Shirley Shirt, she's a residential school survivor, and my mother was born in residential school, and she's a 60 scoop survivor. And I'm half Plains Cree and half, the other part of me is British and Scottish. My British and Scottish side, my grandparents were second generation immigrants, and they were in Montreal when they were born. Yeah, they definitely are the epitome of what non-Indigenous allies are, and they've worked very hard in their lives and in school. My late grandma Ruth was a doctor. She became a woman doctor in the 60s, which is like really amazing, and she was actually known as the queer and Indigenous doctor because no one actually wanted to work with them. And she worked really hard to make sure everyone got the help that they needed. I'm actually really proud always to mention her and talk about her because she always used to call me love, and how I'd say love is sagituin in Cree. So yeah, I definitely have a strong line of a woman behind me. Yeah. So I definitely grew up in a blended family. I grew up with my mom mostly. Both my parents were definitely providers. They worked really hard, especially my mom. She definitely had a really hard life, and I actually have 3 older siblings. So they definitely had it very rough, probably in CFS for the first 10 years of their life, because my mom she just didn't have it together, and yeah, it was really hard. And when I came along, she was about 27 when she had me, and she called me her star, her star baby. My father did not want to have kids at all, but she said otherwise, which was really awesome. And basically, we did grow up in a lot of domestic violence, especially since like the oldest sibling, there's a 10-year gap. So I definitely didn't really have the greatest role models around me growing up. It was definitely really hard to navigate. My dad is also a functional alcoholic, so he was always nice though when he was under the influence, but it was just kind of annoying. And they were both super busy, but my mom always kind of kept me around all the time. And when I was probably 8 years old, I actually found what I was really good at and really loved to do was basketball. And it was just like my dream when I was a kid, and we didn't even know how it was going to happen, but to go play overseas, in the States. And I ended up actually making that happen. And I was also very lucky and fortunate that my mom really started healing when she had me, and we started going to ceremonies. So I definitely grew up around that part, which was really awesome and neat. That's where I actually sat and prayed for the dreams that I accomplished here today, and that I continue to give back to. I've had the opportunity to go play basketball in New York for the first 2 years. When I was 18, after that I went to play NCAA Division I basketball, which was a super cool opportunity in Mississippi at an HBCU, and that stands for Historical Black College University, which was super cool. One of the things I really love, even though it was all the culture shock, but is how proud they were and who they were, which was nice. Because definitely it was hard kind of growing up in mainstream systems, because I actually have the privilege of not looking Indigenous. So I just don't, people don't assume that I'm Indigenous at all, especially in mainstream. And it was really hard that my family does suffer with addiction and abuses, and that I would always just kind of be around like, oh, Indigenous people are always alcoholics, drug addicts, and etc. So it was definitely really hard growing up in those mainstream systems, because I would say, like, I remember this one time I was in grade 10 and I was in Catholic, I grew up in the Catholic school system, and I was sitting there and the teacher said, hey, so how did residential schools help Indigenous peoples? And then this one student raised her hand and said that all natives are alcoholics and drug addicts. And I raised my hand and I was like, you just called me and my whole family alcoholics and drug addicts. And she's like, you're different. And in reality, I'm not. And it was also really hard because like, she wasn't too far. Like, my siblings were struggling with that, and it was, but I still kind of stand strong. And you shouldn't be saying that. Like, we work really hard, and we're really wonderful people if you actually get to know us. And being able to be here and be a part of this work even after basketball, because school was definitely very challenging, is super amazing. And I'm super grateful, because even just talking on a mic in front of you wasn't always easy. I was a little nervous in the beginning. I was like, just kind of rushing through everything, but I'm super grateful. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I'm definitely a big believer that anyone can accomplish anything that they want in their life, and I definitely did, and I will continue to do so and work alongside with these amazing youth. So, hi.
Yeah, so I'll introduce myself again. Tanse Nidisnigas and Kapiana Setmikuso. So Kapiana Setmikuso is my spirit name, which translates into descending eagle. I received my spirit name at the age of 18, and I would say that that's really the time in my life where I really started to find out who I was, my identity, where I come from, all those things that kind of help people along in life. I didn't have that growing up. I didn't have, the language, ceremony, and that sort of thing. We grew up in Brandon, away from our communities. And my mom is a language keeper. Unfortunately, she did not teach her kids how to speak. But she's been working very hard, and, so have I and my partner, to learn our language and reclaim that for ourselves. And it's those little things that we're learning, like Nitisigasin and you know, saying words to each other like sagitu in love. And, you know, in my experience reclaiming language, the most profound and impactful times have been at ceremony, not in the language classroom. They've been at times where I've been listening to medicine people or just other community members to speak their language. And one of the teachings that I was taught back in Musagagan was Gigat Meta Machinamaso, which is a teaching that says, do not speak negatively about yourself, or do not think negatively. And I thought that was just so cool that was just like a teaching that my ancestors just told each other, and that was life promotion, you know, in the works, you know, millennia ago. And I just thought that was so cool, and it's just one of the things I kind of carry with myself. And my understanding is that, you know, Creator puts things in front of you, lessons and signs. And when we think in a negative perspective or a negative outlook, we may miss the signs and the teachings and lessons that Creator is trying to present to you. I'm not saying, you know, oh, you gotta be shooting rainbows out your butt the whole time. It's just, you know, have that understanding that, you know, things are meant to be seen, not in a negative way. And that's how I've been trying to look back on my story, because for a really long time I used to look at it in a very negative way. So Gabrielle said that you know, they had the privilege of looking white passing. I do not have that privilege, at least I don't think. You know, I look very indigenous. You know, my dad always really. You hear we would be driving in the car. Here's another story. We'd be driving in the car, and like the radio would come on, and like they'd be on like Star FM or whatever, and they'd be like, "Okay, so there was a robbery downtown, and an indigenous person looking in appearance had fled the scene." And my dad was always like, what is an indigenous person looking like? A person appearing indigenous look like fleeing the scene? Like, did he flee on horseback and loincloth, like with a tomahawk? Like, you know, what exactly? And you know, that was one of the things I struggled with growing up as a child, is identity and what I looked like. When I was really young, I had grown out my hair. It was actually just, you know, down past my shoulders a little bit. And that's a very, there's a custom to that, right? I didn't know that, but I got made fun of it a lot in my schools, in my class, because I was the only brown kid in my class growing up. And one of the things they would often say to me is like, "Oh, you look like a girl." And I actually got a lot of those kind of comments growing up. I looked very feminine, you know, I talked very feminine. My voice was a lot higher than it was, than it is now. And you know, I didn't act like a boy growing up, I guess. And I had really long hair and I was pretty, so I looked like a girl. But that made me very that really affected me, and it sent me down a path of resentment and identity issues. And when I was in grade 5, that's the reason why I cut my hair, and I really think that was the point in my life that set me down a very dark path of identity issues. When I cut my hair, you know, I cut it with that intention of like, I don't want to be indigenous. You know, I don't want to be brown. I don't like who I am, and I don't like what people are telling me that indigenous people are. The only times I hear about them are on the radio when they're, you know, doing crime or whatever. So I cut my hair, and I kept it short ever since. And it isn't until recently that I've actually had the courage to really grow out my hair, and, you know, with the intention of building a stronger connection to my spirit. Because the teaching where I'm from with our braids and why we braid our hair and why we grow it long is that our hair is an extension of ourselves and our spirit. So the longer our hair is and the closer it is to the ground, the more grounded you are in spirit, the more grounded you are in the land and in yourself. And for me, that's sort of a scary undertaking, you know, being more in tune with my spirit and, you know, with my culture, because I didn't grow up in that way. And so that's one of the things that kind of like I had to kind of overcome. And that sounds kind of weird when you think about it, right? You think, oh, Indigenous youth are probably just so eager to learn their language and to grow their hair and to, you know, do powwow and all that stuff. But it's scary, you know, like spirituality became this sort of like, it became sort of like this trendy thing that like, you know, people are like, okay, we're going to do some meditation and we're going to like do yoga and we're going to get all spiritual. But like, if you've been through a spiritual experience, we know that it's fucking scary. You know, seeing spirits and hearing the spirits talk to you, like, no one wants that. Like, like it's scary, and like it's a huge undertaking. And that's one of the things that, you know, a lot of youth we don't really think about when we were trying to reconnect youth, is that, you know, some youth may just not be ready for that kind of stuff. So we have to kind of ease them into things and show them like little like things that are just more approachable, like you know, learning how to say, you know, hello in your language instead of just, you know, trying to, you know, teach them all these like different teachings and that sort of thing. Just being gentle, right? That gentle teacher, right? All these things that I'm talking about are in the toolkit. So yeah, so in the past few years, I've really found out who I am as a person, where I come from, and, you know, where I'm going, and it's really set me on a really good path. And I've met amazing people like Connor. We just love Connor. He's just so amazing in what he does. He's so organized, and he's so young. Like, how old are you?
I'm 20.
He's 20. He's 20 years old. And he's like, he's on these boards and stuff. He's got meetings on the go. It's like, oh, I'm 25, by the way. I don't think I said that. You know, I'm finally graduating university after 8 years. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with, you know, not having to be the traditional get in, get out 4 years. That's not how life works, and that's definitely not how life works for Indigenous youth. There are a lot of things I had to overcome, like finding my identity, you know, reconnecting with culture and spirit. This past year, I was able to finish my commitment to Sundance. I committed to a 4-year Sundance back home. And those are the things that have made me capable to do the things I am doing today. You know, all the things in the toolkit are the things that enable me to come out here and speak with you folks, to go to different places and to learn and to share knowledge. And it's really, I really have to really, you know, acknowledge that, and acknowledge the spirits and the guides that have, you know, put me along this path, but also give myself a pat on the back, you know, for being able to put myself out there and to, you know, find those connections, and, you know, to be brave and to be courageous, and you know, to reconnect with culture and all those things. So that's a little bit about me. I'm going to give it off to Connor now. I just want to thank you all for listening, and Sagi Tuin.
For the record, I do love these guys too, very, very much. I might stand up midway through because I can't sit still very long. I realized also that I had not really introduced myself this entire time. So, ani kinawaya nimkins indijnika zo kikendan donjaba benishin dondem anishnavaninindao swakamakandonda. My government name is Connor Lafortune. My Nishnabek name is Nimkins, which means Little Thunder. I am from Okikendat, Okis First Nation in northeastern Ontario. If you're familiar with Ontario, it's 4 hours north from Toronto. If you're very familiar with Ontario, it's in the French River area. So not sure where we are in that, but it is a beautiful place. 2 islands in the middle of the French River, La Rivière des Français, and just the most beautiful place, although the mountains do challenge that a little bit. I work and live in Nsokmak, which is colonially known as Sudbury, And all of that is on the Robinson-Huron Treaty Territory, which is what I've lived for, I would say, all but 2 years of my life. Those are my home territories. I grew up on the outside of my community, so my First Nation is very small. We're 200 in the colder months and 250 in the summer, very traveling community. It's about a 30-minute drive down a dirt road from where I grew up, which is in Noëlleville, or La Rivière des Français, or when you go to high school in the public system. Now there is the opportunity to also do public school for elementary school, but that wasn't there when I was growing up. But just to show you, very small community, very French Catholic community, very limiting community. And when Gabrielle was speaking about like, oh, no, not you, you're different, there's that aspect of othering that often happens when people get close to people that are different from them. It's like we often would hear like, oh, those indigenous people, and we'd be like, what about, all of your friends that are indigenous? No, those are people from Dokis. That's different. And when you're young and when you're growing up in that, you can think that that's so like, oh, okay, cool, like they do accept me, then I'm fine. Meanwhile, you have to invalidate an entire part of who you are when you're doing that. And so we always like to say that invisibility is never a privilege, and it's never a comfort, and it's never something that is fun to do for the person that has to do it. I am young. I'm the baby of this group. I think in the bio, I wrote that I was 19, and when I was giving one of these presentations in Dawson, one of the persons was like, "You're 19," and I was like, "I turned 20 though. I swear, I'm 20 now." I am still in school. I'm in a double honors specialization in Indigenous Studies, Social Justice, and Gender Equity with a minor in Legal Studies. My dream was to go to law school and to do more of that community work. And when I was growing up, leaving my community, and not necessarily my First Nation, but the community that I grew up in, was something that I would dream about, because I thought it would open up so many things and would open up my mind. It would do all of these things. And although it did do that, in the last few years, I found that academia is so limiting in so many other different ways. As soon as you are a little bit different, they really don't like that. And I've realized, I wanted to stay in school because I love learning. I've realized that the work that I do and the things, that the people that I meet along the way teach me much more than I could ever learn in a classroom. And in fact, I missed a whole week of class, and I'm like, too bad, I basically told my professors that I really didn't care. But you get to see that when you're a little bit different, or when you're a whole lot different, then the system that you are trying to benefit from, it completely rejects you, and it's really a question of trying to change it and getting burnt, or just coasting through and burning yourself as you go. And so, although my dream was to continue in academia and in that path, it really has, since doing this work, has shaped the way that we can help people, and much more personally if we do it the way that we are comfortable doing. So life promotion, things like that. I also work in harm reduction and other forms of Indigenous education directly in schools and outside of it. Namely Thunderbird, School Mental Health Ontario, Mental Health Commission of Canada, all of those organizations, and really trying to decolonize those spaces as I'm entering them, which also can be quite a challenge. When we talk about academia, we often talk about knowledge being this resource. And in academia, it's often epistemology. So how do we know what we know? And whenever I have these conversations, I always question the professors of like, well, how do you know what you know? Is it because you read it in a book? Is it because there was research? Is it because there were studies by people that look like you or are like you? And so when we think about Indigenous knowledge, we don't often think of it as this resource that is so integral to life and to so many different things. And so when we take a look, for example, at things like canoeing, people think canoeing is just like a fun thing to do. They won't see it as like survival or hunting or shelter, or they'll think of beadwork as just simply art. And I agree, I love the art, I do it all the time. But they won't see that it's a form of storytelling, and it's a teacher, and it's also a way to interpret treaties and to mark history. If you've, things like wampums, it transcends just writing. Or they'll think of music, and they'll think of it as just entertainment. And music in our cultures can be so much more than that. Can be the heartbeat of our nation, the embodiment of spirit, and a teacher and a storyteller in so many different ways that we can give knowledge. And so when we think of knowledge as being this white space, this this very finite space where you have to have a degree, you have to have a doctorate, you have to have these classrooms where you sit like this and you listen like this, and all you're doing is just regurgitating what you think that you've learned. We really need to reshape that form of knowledge, because it is not always the best one to have, and it is not always the only one to have. And so when we think of knowledge and validity, it often brings us to the question of who should be speaking on different things and who is valid. When we come to these spaces, and as Indigenous youth, we often have to prove ourselves in these spaces. So a little bit less so now, but in the past, I know that if you read books like by Thomas King, he's one of my favorite authors, and the book The Truth About Stories, he talks about how when he would go to conferences, he would be entertainment. And as an Indigenous person, what he had to say was entertainment. So he'd be presenting alongside people with suits and people with degrees and stats and charts and all of these things. And when it would come time to pay, to validate that information and that lived knowledge, he would often be left with a thank you. And when he would ask, he would go, well, no, they actually, gave some information. You're just here to, do the Indian spiel, and that's how he was presented. And so as time went on, he learned to put away his bone bead necklace and put away his ribbon shirts and start dressing like the businessmen. And then when he started dressing like the businessmen, then all of a sudden he was paid because he showed up prepared and he showed up looking like them. But then he also realized that the more that he looked like them and the more that he was validated in that experience, the less his peers saw him as one of them. So the more that you appear Indigenous, or the more that you present as quote unquote what they would determine as entertainment, the less you are validated. But the more that you appear like the other, the less that your peers even recognize you. And I think that we deal with that a lot when we are trying to navigate these spaces of how to present ourselves, how to share that knowledge. And you might be wondering, isn't he supposed to be telling us about his story? He's just going on about facts. And so that brings me to my story a little bit more. When I started doing this work, I didn't realize how lost I really was in my identities, in the way that I was brought up, in my story, in my healing. It really, for me, was like, oh, okay, so I can tell people how to do this stuff, but if I'm not doing it myself, then am I even being true to what I know and to what I've experienced? So as you've probably noticed, my first language is French, my second is English, and I'm learning Anishinaabe, and that has been an integral part of my healing because language hasn't been in my family for 5 generations. And in my community, we have very few language speakers, and if they are language speakers, they know very little, and often it is only in the oral form. And so that becomes hard to teach sometimes because there's not that written form that comes in. And so when I started doing life promotion, it was really a wake-up call of seeing how this can be implemented in my life. And I realized that I felt very unstable and very uncomfortable in most of my environments. Grew up in a very, white Catholic French community. I was in university the first time I was in a classroom with people outside of white folk, which is very interesting as someone who has developed critical thought at a young age and has, learned from many different communities and experienced different communities, but never in a daily sense, never in a sense of like, hey, we're in the classroom together, hey, we're on the hockey team together, and all of those things. Pause for dramatic effect, I guess. Oh, okay. I can just talk loud. So it was very difficult for me to navigate those spaces as a queer, francophone, and Indigenous person, and really knowing where I fit into all of those spaces. And often when I did find a space that I could fit into, it was just one or two of my identities. So I always have to keep a part of me behind. And when I was learning about life promotion, I tried to think about what that actually meant in the grand scheme of things. And if you've ever heard me speak about it before, I often return to my great-grandfather. I just say grandfather because that's great, and great are just not the way that we speak in where I'm from. It's grandfather, it's nothing, and a lot of people are aunties and uncles without ever being related in any sense of the Western world. But I think of my grandfather all the time, and I always bring him with me in more ways than one. If you've noticed, I have some body art, and this is a canoe that I got for him a while back because he used to make birch bark canoes. And I recently added the lettering, and if you can't see it from there. You won't be able to read it up close either because he didn't learn to write very well, and so he didn't write much. And so the writing is very blurry, and I remember when I was getting it tattooed, she was like, "Are you sure?" And I was like, "It's fine. Nobody can read it on paper. Like, if it spreads on my arm, then that makes it even better." But what it says is, and I thank my grandparents for bringing me up the way that they did. I am richly blessed. My grandfather was raised by his grandparents, and in his letter he talks about different things, different experiences, and it was very like question answer. So it was like, how did I grow up? And then he would write it out, and he would go like, what did I do for work, and all of those things. And I really don't know what prompted this writing exercise, but I'm really glad it happened because I recently was able to receive it since his passing. And when I was reading through it, it made me very emotional, and to hear all of these things that he's had to experience, and some of them weren't very fun and weren't very pleasant. But at the end, he ends it with, "I'm richly blessed." And he talks about his beautiful wife and his beautiful daughter and his beautiful grandkids, and talking about my mom and my uncle. And just to see that you can be so appreciative of the life that you've been given because it is yours and you have made it what you have wanted it to be. When I work with Life Promotion, I often return to a recording that I hear of my grandfather telling a story about being out on the land and being on the boat and not going too fast because you're going to miss everything. And I remember one of you today have spoken about how you can just miss everything if you're going too fast. You can't see the birds telling you a story, or the land, or the berries, or the different things that you can learn. So to take your time and to really look at everything around you before you decide to act. And later in the story, he talks about putting his footprints in the snow, and he talks about how we got to be careful where we put those, because that's